This is legal, this is easy to do, and making a 20-minute or certainly an hour-long mistake could cost you this Iditarod. Today on the Iditarod is gonna find us starting out, I think, camping somewhere or on the trail somewhere outside of Iditarod for the second time, heading back the way we came from. Teams will be a fair distance into that run, I think. As a musher, when you're coming back, having just turned around, going past Iditarod, turning around at flat and coming back, what you're looking at for the next 24 hours is you're gonna be passing teams. Hopefully by this point we'll have already gotten by most of the teams. Most of that passing will have happened the previous day, I think. You're gonna be starting to focus on, where do I take my mandatory 8? The checkpoints we have ahead of us are going back to Ophir, 76-ish mile, 77-mile run. I think Ophir will be not an uncommon place to take your mandatory 8. Take your mandatory 8 to kind of pay back the dogs for that extra effort on that run. From there, from Ophir back to McGrath is gonna be about 41 miles. It's a fairly good trail. Nothing really exciting or dangerous or technical or difficult in here. This is a fairly heavily trafficked area, so I think we can expect a good trail from Ophir back to McGrath. McGrath is going to be a really popular place for both the 24 on the way out and the 8 on the way back, and it kind of breaks the race into natural thirds. There will be some teams that then go on even farther to the Nikolai checkpoint to take their 8 there. That's another 48 or 50 miles from McGrath. That's kind of the trail we have lined out in front of us. It's all really benign trail. It's not overly challenging. Let's just assume for a second that we'll pick the middle one of those and say people are gonna take their mandatory 8 at McGrath on the way back. What you're gonna be doing today is getting to Ophir, taking a short break there to then try to hop over to McGrath, or maybe having camped on the trail a little bit farther from Ophir, go all the way through Ophir onto McGrath and take your mandatory 8. One thing that we need to keep in mind, despite the fact that the race is 100 miles approximately, shorter than normal, more of those hours of rest are tied up in the mandatory resting time. There's going to be a higher percentage of mandatory rest than on a normal trail. The mandatory 24 we took earlier on, the mandatory 8 that many teams will take after their 24, but you don't necessarily have to take it after your 24, not this year. Understanding that, I think you're gonna see more of a style, maybe should see more of a style, racing to your 24, recuperating, racing to your mandatory 8, recuperating. I don't feel like there's as much opportunity in this race to really get the team into that long travel mode, running our own run-rest schedule at a sustainable pace without having a mandatory rest to make up the difference, where maybe we ran a little bit harder than what is fully, truly sustainable. You're gonna probably have to do a little bit longer run or a little bit faster run coming into your mandatory 8, kind of preparing the team to benefit and need that 8 hours of rest. So I think the mandatory 8 just became more important than ever before to maximize it, which is interesting. I'm not gonna say if that's good or bad or if I like it or not. I think McGrath is gonna be a really popular place to take your mandatory 8. It's also very easy to ship sleds to, so you might see mushers come into McGrath, take their mandatory 8 in McGrath, and in that 8 hours, take that opportunity to switch from maybe a bigger sled that they started the race with to a lighter, what we would call a finishing sled that's designed to be run with maybe a 10 or 11 dog team versus the 14 dog team that we started the race with. This is legal, this is easy to do. McGrath is a big enough location that it's easy to ship a sled out there, and also the sled that you switch away from, the one you leave behind, is easy to mail back home. And I think the end of that day is gonna find us back in either McGrath or towards Nikolai and getting ready to take that mandatory 8. Hope that we did it right, I think. I think that's gonna be a big part of it. If you miscalculate, if your team wasn't ready for that mandatory 8, that could cost you your race. Being a shorter race this year, I think the margins of separation are gonna be smaller. I think teams are gonna be closer together, and making a 20-minute or certainly an hour-long mistake could cost you this Iditarod. But that's generally the section of trail that we should be having to focus on today, and some of the things that we are gonna be focusing on. Getting from the last miles over to Ophir, that 41-mile run to McGrath, that's probably where we're gonna end our day, is in McGrath, thereabout at least. Either mushers starting their mandatory 8 or getting positioned to take that mandatory 8 as late as Nikolai.